Welcome back to Oh and Another Thing, here for a bonus pod and a bonus YouTube episode for you guys this middle of the week, this Tuesday. And it's all about the importance of picking the right VP. We talked about how, earlier in the podcast today, we talked about how we ended up, after the fallout from Nixon's presidency, after everything that happened, we ended up with a Gerald Ford presidency. We didn't talk about that in the podcast earlier today, but one of the side effects that we were forced to have because of the way people voted in 1968 via their white rage, essentially, and rage about Vietnam, we somehow ended up with Nixon as president, Spiro Agnew as vice president, Nixon as president, and then somehow Gerald Ford as vice president. I'm not sure how Gerald Ford ended up being vice president in any of this. But regardless, when Nixon left office, we ended up with Gerald Ford. Why does that matter? Because Gerald Ford was not a very good president. Gerald Ford had a short term in office. I believe it was, I'm seeing 74 to 77. He wasn't reelected, obviously. Nelson Rockefeller was his VP. Very interesting there, because Nelson Rockefeller really wanted to be president for a long time. Always said he would be, but then never was. Different issue there. But because of that, the United States arguably was put back probably by two administrations, because two administrations worth of progress because of that economically, and you could even argue on the global stage. And it's why Carter had, I believe, such a hard time with his presidency. Things matter along the chain of command, and who passes to who matters in a way. And that's why it really matters who Joe Biden picks for his VP, because here at Owen Another Thing, we believe that between the cascading flow of shit that has been falling down on the current administration via coronavirus, via its own bumbling handling of the coronavirus, everything else added on top of the coronavirus that this administration has done to piss off some sect of undecided voters, we believe that we have the weakest incumbent president that we've ever had in this country, even weaker than Gerald Ford. That being said, it matters very much who Joe Biden picks for his VP, because he is not guaranteed, nothing is guaranteed, but in our eyes, he is essentially bound to be the next president if all goes right. If all goes right. So, a lot of names have been floated. We've heard Elizabeth Warren. We've heard Stacey Abrams. We've heard Amy Klobuchar. We've heard Gretchen Whitmer. Anybody else? I know there's a long list. Kamala, Katie Porter. A few others are on the list. I know even for a while they were talking about Val Demmings being in the running. Biden kind of backed himself into a corner. I'm not saying he was wrong to do this, but he did not need to vocalize that he was going to have a woman be his VP. That really shrank his possibilities down by about 50% and took away a possibility of having Bernie be his VP, which I think might have been really helpful to unite the party and to unite the ticket, because what's one of the things that we're most worried about? Not getting Bernie's voters to show up on election day, so why not leave the door open to even offer Bernie a VP position? We know that VPs don't often have a great say in things. We know Cheney had a big say in things, and we know that was pretty much planned and set up from the beginning. But it's another example of why the VP matters. So, if I had to pick today who I would want to see be the VP, it would probably be Elizabeth Warren. I love the entire field. I think everybody is great out of who he left himself to choose from. Gretchen Whitmer would be good. I don't think Gretchen Whitmer I don't think she has the national profile that people would say, oh, we know. Well, okay, take it back, because up until now, if coronavirus hadn't happened, people wouldn't know who Gretchen Whitmer was on a large enough scale. She could have ended up being a Tim Kaine type, a random governor, was he a representative or was he the governor at the time?
He was a senator.
Senator at the time. Just a random person from some random state, a body, essentially. I feel like Whitmer would have been the more boring pick to go with, something that wouldn't have changed the ticket at all, something that would have only brought a woman to the ticket. Essentially, all that would be a woman from the Midwest.
That was kind of my frustration with him, like saying, "And I'm going to pick a woman as my VP." Is it kind of is that same sort of culture that we have around inclusivity in like fashion and in TV and everything, where people are like, look, we put a person of color on here. Look how great we are. It's like, just do it.
Just do it.
And don't when you make a big thing of it, it takes away from...
It takes away from the pioneering of it, so to speak.
If you want to pick a woman as your VP, just pick a woman as your VP, you know? I felt like that was really just like a dig he wanted to take.
Yeah, he just wanted to say, it just wanted to be something he wanted to be the person to say that I would pick a woman. Like, I think that was just something he wanted to do. And it did shrink his available choices by quite a bit. And a possibility to have a really strong Bernie Biden ticket that could have... it would have won in a landslide, I think. I don't think there's any question to having a full Democratic Party going out to just straight up outvote Republicans is the ideal scenario, because as we know, there are more of us than there are of them. Nonetheless, that's not the reality we have now. Klobuchar would have been great, but I think, okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. Lunch has to get here somehow. If we're to pick who the Tim Kaine would be of what our options are, it's probably more of an Amy Klobuchar at this point. Klobuchar does not move the needle for me at all. She had 2 good debates in the presidential. Well, she had a lot of good debates. 2 that were really substantial and almost led her to being an option for people.
But I don't think she would strengthen his ticket.
Doesn't strengthen the ticket at all. Doesn't do anything for it. And then, that's not what this is about. We have to remember, it's not just about having a strong ticket. It's about who would do the best job governing down the road. Because, again, we're not sure how long Biden can last. Let's not forget, he's an old man. So, CHAR would be great in terms of legislating, but I don't think CHAR gets him elected. So, CHAR, off the list. Let's talk Stacey Abrams. We love Stacey Abrams here. Stacey Abrams has done a lot of good. Stacey Abrams is a great organizer. Stacey Abrams is a very smart political mind. However, Stacey Abrams hasn't recently held public office in a high enough capacity that people would give a shit about her governing qualifications on a ticket, and that won't move the needle for swing voters. Stacey Abrams would move the needle for progressives like us. People who pay close attention to politics, who saw what happened in Georgia, saw that she should have been the governor of Georgia had it not been for less than savory happenings on in that gubernatorial election in Georgia in 2018? 18, I think it was. Regardless, I don't think Stacey Abrams, despite all of her qualifications, despite how much we all like her, despite the good she has done, despite all the good she's doing and making sure the elections are fair, I don't think that makes her the favorite to be a VP pick, and I don't think that should make her the VP pick, as much as we like Stacey Abrams, as much as she would move the needle for us. We've seen Whitmer, Klobuchar. Who else? Those are really the front runners. Kamala Harris is also in the running, and I love Kamala. I think Kamala would be the best argument for a legislator. If you were to pick a VP that you think can do the most in the worst case scenario, I put Kamala up there 1-2 with Elizabeth Warren, but I do not put any of the other candidates in that category because I believe that they could just be a body there. I believe if it were to be, let's say it is Amy Klobuchar in some weird society where people want Char to be the vice president, there's a good possibility that we end up with a President Klobuchar, and I feel like a President Klobuchar could lead us to the same place that President Ford did. I know that's a hot take, not knowing a ton about her legislatively, but that's just where we are because we don't know about her legislatively enough because she hasn't done enough legislatively to really move the needle for us. So she has her qualifications, we know. That really leaves for us Elizabeth Warren. And I know there is a risk to Elizabeth Warren that people don't want to take, and that is that there's a possibility that putting Elizabeth Warren out there to be the vice president hurts Democrats in the Senate, and I think that is so bogus whenever you have literally a state full of Massachusetts Kennedys waiting in the wings to just hop into a Senate somewhere. So it's not like we'd have a hard time filling that vacant Senate seat that she would obviously have to vacate to become vice president. I know that is the big worry with Elizabeth Warren. But what's great about Elizabeth Warren is, one, she should have been the nominee. and I don't care if that makes you tune out here. Elizabeth Warren should have been the presidential nominee if it were not for obvious sexism, and if it were not for Bernie already having a head start having run in 2016. All right, put it out there. And also, people did not, for some reason, give Beth Warren enough credit as a policymaker, even though her whole thing was that she is the best policymaker, and that's what drew a lot of her support to her. We'll digress from that because we are still mad about that. Aside from having been the person who should have been the nominee, in any sane world, Elizabeth Warren is the nominee. Yeah, her or Bernie, but still her over. Aside from that, she would bring you, hopefully, some of those Bernie supporters that weren't so entrenched in Bernie support that they were calling her a snake online, but that they're on the fence about voting for Joe Biden. Now, obviously, Joe Biden would have to do some work, I assume, in terms of his image for Elizabeth Warren to feel totally comfortable risking her entire reputation to be his VP. Because, obviously, Elizabeth Warren has her reputation of being a fighter and a fighter for women. Joe Biden also has that, but he also has the Tara Reade allegation that we hope is vetted properly and investigated properly, and that if we get to a point where there is wrongdoing there by Joe Biden, that we end up with a better candidate, and maybe that is Beth Warren at that point. But all that aside, if you want to pick somebody who, let's say Joe Biden, worst case scenario, can't go for another 4 years after winning election in 2020. 2024 election comes around, we're in a situation where the person who is VP is the front runner to be the next president in 2024 after that election. I think the best bet we'd have, and the safest bet we'd have, is Elizabeth Warren to be someone who could get votes electorally, things done, and get enough national support that we wouldn't risk losing the presidency, the Senate, and the House in an election that would be kind of unprecedented in the sense that it would be either in a small handful of elections for president that were not every 8 years, Because that would be like Biden would have to either be in failing health, he would either have to choose not to run, all kinds of scenarios for that to happen. But if that happens, the person you best hope is there is Elizabeth Warren. Because she's the one who's going to get policies done. She's the one who's going to be able to keep the Senate aligned, keep the House in line. And honestly, she'd probably just be the most qualified person left at that point. In terms of just qualifications, and then electorally, we've seen that she's the one that people want right now. I think I saw 39% of people asked would prefer her to be the nominee. And I know that's not how we should choose the nominee based purely on what people want, but that should help. If 39% of the Democratic Party is saying that this is the candidate, and that person is also a progressive from the other side of the aisle, that says something. That says a lot for what she could do to this election landscape. And by putting her on the ticket, I do believe you merge those two sides to a point where it would take a small miracle for Trump to win an election in that kind of climate, where he has to fight against everything he has to fight against already, and then the qualifications of what could be, or the qualifications of his challengers in an election. Whenever you have a Biden-Warren ticket, two people who have worked on different issues throughout their time, oftentimes on opposite sides of things, but both been very successful in that, it's hard to campaign against that. Very hard to campaign against that, and it's very hard whenever you have limited ammunition like Trump will have going into this election. We already see he has limited ammunition. We see they don't have a lot of plays left in their playbook because they'd be using them now. Do not forget, we are 6 months out, nearly. Are we 6 months? Are we
180 days, I guess, now.
We're not far out.
We are 6 months, yeah.
We're to the point in this where Trump should be able to start saying, look what I've done, look what I've done, look what my administration has done. But he's not going to get to do that. So their best bet is to campaign against whoever they're against. And if they're against a Biden-Warren ticket, I should say, tough to beat. Tough to beat. Probably the toughest one to beat. Anyway, that's our bonus one. That's the importance of picking the right VP, because not only does that lead us to victory in 2020, you have to think about 2024, 2028, and even 2022 should something happen to poor Joe Biden. That poor old man. A lot to worry about. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you on Friday.